What's goody with you all today? My name is RayGVT, and today, a little bit of a different video. Today, I wanted to take a look at some Yu-Gi-Oh video games. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is a great game that we all love, sometimes, but today, I wanted to take a look at some other Yu-Gi-Oh games that have existed for a while now, and just kind of talk about them for a bit. I just want to say right off the bat that this is a very different type of video than what I'm used to making and what you may be used to seeing on this channel. I've been wanting to make this video for years, but couldn't because I just never had what I needed to make it. But now that everything's in place, I can do it. Today, I wanted to take you guys through my personal journey of collecting and finally getting to experience some old Yu-Gi-Oh games that I never got to when I was younger. For years, I just wanted to be able to get my hands on some of these games, especially when I was younger. But for a ton of reasons, I just never could. From being a kid with literally no way to pay for them myself, to becoming a teenager who just couldn't find or trade for them, to now being an adult having to deal with the ridiculous price spike of modern retro game hunting, these games have continued to escape me for years. Until now, this is my journey with these very special games and I really want to share it, so I hope you stick around to check it out. So I've been collecting various games for a while now, mainly on the DS and 3DS consoles. I started a while back in 2021 and was able to secure a lot of really great games before they skyrocketed in price during the pandemic. With the closure of the Nintendo eShop sometime back, this issue got even worse. Prices for various retro and modern games are at a high, and finding even the most basic games can be such a challenge. This really depends on the console and platform that you're looking for, but usually if it's anything Nintendo, good luck. Earlier last year in 2023, my good friend and I, YuGiOh, who you guys absolutely need to check out if you haven't already, because he talks a lot about retro games and he even made one of the funniest videos that I've seen all year about retro game collecting and a guide for those who would like to get into it. Check him out, please. He's absolutely mad and he's one of my closest brothers in gaming and he makes some really cool content. Anyways, early last year, YuGiOh and I really got back into the retro game collecting grind with the announcement of the 3DS and Wii U eShop closure. And when I say we really got back into it, I mean we really got back into it. YuGiOh has a collection that would make your jaw drop. I personally only collected games that I was nostalgic for in my childhood or games that I wasn't able to get while I was a broke high school student and wanted to finally get to relive that. Among a lot of these games, some of my highlights of games that I've managed to get is the original Mega Man Zero and ZX series, the Spectros trilogy, don't ask, I loved these games as a kid, and the Sonic the Hedgehog DS and 3DS line of games, except this one, and every single mainline Pokemon game from the DS and 3DS era. I'm so happy that I was able to find every single one of these specifically before the price hikes kicked in during the pandemic. Now, among the games that I was able to get, there's one group of games that I've never been able to get my hands on, and that's all the handheld Yu-Gi-Oh games. I'm talking specifically about the Nintendo DS World Championship titles and a couple of other side games too, as well as the PSP titles too, which I'll go over as well. Until now, after a lot, and I mean a lot of patient waiting and market watching and seeing prices fly all over the place, I was finally able to secure a lot of the games that I always wanted to play in my childhood. You guys already know that Yu-Gi-Oh has been a huge part of my life for years, ever since I was a kid. But ever since the day that I got my first Nintendo DS console, these are games that I always wanted and just could never have. Even after I became a whole adult working 2 different jobs, the price of these games has always been through the roof and it's always been hard to justify buying even a single one of them, since even the oldest one can fetch a really heavy price tag. Today, I kind of want to do a very brief little retrospective on these games, as well as give you guys my genuine thoughts on what I think of them years after they originally released, and just take you guys through my collection for a little. So let's do it. Okay, so before we get into the DS games, we have one other platform to look at actually, and that's the Game Boy. Yu-Gi-Oh games have existed since the beginning of the franchise from the PS2 and onwards, but there were actually quite a few Yu-Gi-Oh games on the Game Boy. Some of them I actually owned when I was younger too. When I was in primary school, a really good friend of mine at the time gave me one of his old Game Boys. It was my entry point into modern gaming at the time because I just didn't have anything back then. We couldn't really afford a lot of video games until I entered high school, so this was really awesome. He gave me his old Game Boy SP in the fire red color, and he also gave me his original copy of Pokemon Red version. I spent hours playing this every night. When I entered high school, that's when my love for Yu-Gi-Oh really started and picked up a lot. A friend of mine had a bunch of old Yu-Gi-Oh merch that he didn't care for anymore, so he gave it all to me because I was the one kid in high school that would actually talk about anime and stuff at a time when it was seen as uncool to like this stuff. Oh, how the times have changed. Among those things were two Game Boy games, Yu-Gi-Oh! Day of the Duelist and Godzilla Domination. This game kept me up because it was so fun. Anyways, Day of the Duelist is a game that I spent so much time on when I was younger and is the first World Championship game in the line that I got to play. This game and pretty much every other game that I'm gonna look at is a card simulator. They've been around forever. It featured over 1,000 cards from the OCG and included a heap of cards in every booster pack up to that time, which was Invasion of Chaos in the TCG, which was a set that combined both Controller of Chaos and Invader of Darkness in the OCG. It featured a slightly faster battle system than what we saw with the previous game, World Championship 2004, but it was still pretty slow. And rather than having a list of opponents that you could duel from a menu, this game featured a full story mode which had free roaming and you could walk around and stuff and challenge NPCs to a duel. The story is based off the Battle City part of the anime and it was actually pretty cool from what I remember. You could buy cards from the in-game shop as well as battle various duelists, including a few notable characters from the anime. You could also trade and battle other players using the Game Boy Link cable. I can't speak too much on this feature because I never used it and it predates my time period. There's not too much to say from a gameplay perspective really. Because pretty much all of the games that I'm going to be looking at are all card simulators, there's not really too much else to talk about outside of individual or unique features that this game does or what that game introduced. From a personal perspective though, I enjoyed this game so much as a kid and it really helped kickstart my Yu-Gi-Oh journey at the time. I loved it a lot and going back to it today, it certainly shows its age, but hey, it was a product of its time. I was able to get the Game Boy cartridge of this game from someone that was getting rid of a lot of bulk stuff, and this happened to be in there, so I was able to snag it for about 20 bucks, which is pretty good. No cover, unfortunately, but that doesn't bother me too much. I will take this time to skim over a couple of other games that I was able to secure when I recently went on holiday and went retro hunting with my boy Guaka. I was able to pick up a loose copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Worldwide Edition, Stairway to the Destined Duel, which was released in 2003 and featured around 1,000 cards, though I'm not sure up to which booster set they went up to from the original sets. This game also took place during the Battle City arc of the anime and plays very similar to most of the other games. Alongside this game, I would also end up getting a loose copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Reshift of Destruction, which is a game that I genuinely never heard of before I saw it. Fake fan, I know. This game is a direct sequel to Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards and it tells its own story. It was released in Japan in 2003 and 2004 for the rest of the world. I haven't had time to sit down with this one just yet, but I'll be sure to give it a bit of playtime. There's actually a ton of Yu-Gi-Oh! Games on the Game Boy, more than I remember, and while I don't own a lot of them yet, I am keeping my eyes out for any that I happen to find. I did want to pick up some boxed copies of some of these games, but after looking at these prices, I think I'm gonna just stick to the loose cartridges for now. I don't care too much for my GBA collection the same way I do for my DS, 3DS, and PSP collections. Also, just quickly, I was able to secure 2 loose copies of both Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku and Dragon Ball Z Supersonic Warriors, which were 2 games that I played the heck out of as a kid. Anyways, let's move on to the next set of games. Now, these next games though, oh man, these are games that I absolutely had to have, and that's the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship line of games for the Nintendo DS. One of my most sought after groups of games ever. In all my years of video game collecting or retro game hunting, this is a group of games that I've always had at the top of my list. For years, I was never able to get my hands on these, but now that I do, let's take a very brief look at some of these. I say brief because again, these are all simulator games that all kind of do the same thing, more or less, outside of specific features a certain game has over another. Starting up first is Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2007. the first World Championship title on the Nintendo DS. This game featured over 1,500 cards at the time, including all the new GX cards up to that point. Presentation-wise, this game looks great. The jump from the Game Boy to the DS was huge. There's so much more expression and life in these games now. Obviously, they're a little outdated by today's standards, but we're talking about back then and when these games were coming out. You could create your own character, sort of, for the campaign. It was very limited, but it was still something. There's also little summon animations, nothing major like what we would get in later games, but it's still charming. There's so much more to these games now with the DS hardware. While the game was another duel simulator, the options for dueling were expanded. You could play against the CPU in things like limited duels, where you can play with a limited pool of cards, and survival duels, where you just duel and beat opponents for as long as you can until you lose. The game just had more now, and keeping in line with the Yu-Gi-Oh game tradition, it came with a set of 3 cards included in the game, which I don't have because this is a second-hand copy. These cards were Spell Striker, Exploder Dragon, and Destiny Hero Disc Commander. The biggest new feature added to these games now was the wireless and online functionality with Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. Rest in peace. This allowed for players to jump into online duels and trade with people from around the world. It even featured a voice chat function where people could actually talk before they started dueling. It's crazy to me to even think how that would have worked. In today's age, I really feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is the last game that needs voice chat for a number of reasons. Could you imagine that? That would actually be hilarious. While World Championship 2007 wasn't the first Yu-Gi-Oh game on the DS, it did well in being the first World Championship game of the DS line. It even had full compatibility with Yu-Gi-Oh GX Spirit Caller, which was the previous game on the handheld. The games that would follow would improve upon what had been built in small but significant ways. World Championship 2008 was the next installment in the DS line of games. This game featured a lot of the same stuff from the 2007 version, now including even more cards up to that point and a couple of more features when it came to the dueling. It included a dual world mode, which was like the story campaign of the game, and a World Championship mode 2, which was like your free duel mode where you could square up against the CPU or wirelessly against other players either near or far from around the world with the Wi-Fi features. You could also have stuff like structured deck battles, which was pretty cool too. You choose from a list of 13 different structure decks and use it to battle with. Outside this, everything from the previous version is still intact with Wi-Fi battles, and the game gives you a set of 3 cards again, this time with Deep Diver, Burden of the Mighty, and Dimensional Fisher. It was a good game, not a massive step from the previous installment, but still really fun for what was. I was able to get both this and World Championship 2007 and 2010, which we'll talk a little about soon, for pretty cheap from someone that was selling these along with a bunch of other DS games that I do not care for that just came in this little plastic sandwich bag. It was amazing. I was able to secure 3 of the games that I always wanted all at once. They didn't have the original covers, but I would later get some proper covers for them and they look so much better now. And then coming in next to really change the game was Yu-Gi-Oh 5D's Stardust Accelerator World Championship 2009. The 5D's era brought a massive shift to the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG with the introduction of synchro summoning. Stardust Accelerator was the first of the World Championship games in the 5D's era and brought a number of new features and improvements for the World Championship games overall. The game featured a brand new story mode featuring settings and characters from the 5D's anime, a turbo duel style gameplay, and it also featured improved graphical quality, which really came through in some of the 3D character images and animations, which were so cool to see. It featured over 2,800 cards, with all the cards up to that point being available. It had cards all the way up to Crimson Crisis, I think, as well as some cards from the Dual Terminal games. It also featured everything expected of the World Championship games up to that point, including full Wi-Fi capability with trading and battling, and came with a set of 3 exclusive cards, which were Infernity Guardian, Infernity Archfiend, and Infernity Dwarf. Stardust Accelerator is where they also really started stepping up their game with the story. It had a lot more effort put into it than the previous titles because it had a whole brand new story with your own original character, and you play through a lot of familiar stuff that happens in the 5Ds anime. I won't go too deep into the summary, but the story, though basic, was pretty well presented. I managed to find this one for a good price online after really waiting out to find a copy that was decently priced. When I say I really waited, I mean I really waited to get this one. I literally had multiple tabs open and would just constantly browse for who and where I could get the cheapest copy from until someone listed a copy of the game for an actual affordable price. I have a lot of nostalgia for the 5Ds era because that's where my love for Yu-Gi-Oh really kicked into overdrive, and that's when I started getting a taste of the TCG player life with going into card shops and seeing people duel at locals and stuff for the first time. While the rest of this video could just be me gushing and reminiscing over that time period, I think we should take a look at the next title in the line instead. Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2010 Reverse of Arcadia was up next in the World Championship line. This featured some nice features like improvements to the story mode, which was now based off the Dark Signers and Earthbound Immortals arc of the 5Ds anime. More characters are also featured to battle against in the story mode too. The Turbo Duels were also expanded on with the introduction of Speed World 2. More puzzles and gimmicks were also introduced to the story mode and the new race games. The actual dueling is still exactly the same. They really stuck with the if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach. Almost nothing has changed in this department. The game now featured over 3,100 cards up to that point, with everything up to absolute power force. World Championship mode was still in the game as your free duel mode to play against either the CPU or to challenge players from around the world. I remember it also used to have a Wi-Fi ranking system and had leaderboards in the game too. Once again, the game came with a set of 3 exclusive promo cards, this time being Stygian Security, Samurai Sword Baron, and Stygian Sergeants. Yeah, not much to say about this one. It's a lot of the same with what you saw from the previous titles. It's more Yu-Gi-Oh! More doing what you love, which was dueling. I like the new story stuff that was added. The race games weren't my favorite thing to do, but it was a neat feature for those that were into it, I guess. A nice game though, and one that I'm very happy to have added to my collection. I got this game alongside both World Championship 2007 and 2008, but while I was able to secure proper covers for those pretty early on, I wouldn't be able to get a cover for this game until quite recently. I just couldn't get a hold of one for the longest time, but thankfully I was able to find someone who does cover reprints for games, and now it looks a lot nicer in my collection. And coming up last but not least is the final game that we would get in the World Championship line of games. Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2011 Over the Nexus. This game is the one that I was looking forward to getting my hands on the most. This was by far the hardest and most expensive game that I was able to get with these DS games by far, and is the main reason why I haven't been able to make this video for ages. It's been one of my most sought after games for years, one of my holy grails right next to Project Cross Zone 2, which I was able to get earlier last year. Featuring over 4,200 cards all the way up to Storm of Ragnarok, this game, in my opinion, was the height of the World Championship games. It featured everything that we saw from the previous 5Ds games and gave us a whole new original storyline set in the Crash Town mini arc of the 5Ds anime, which was so iconic and a lot of people's favorite part of 5Ds. Now, I really want to spend some time on this story because it's actually so well done compared to the previous titles, but for the sake of time, I'll just say that I actually had a lot of fun going through it. Duel runner battles were also introduced and featured battles with up to 3 teammates. It had a puzzle editor too, which let players post up questions and answers and stuff using the Wi-Fi connection, and more new characters were added to the game to be able to duel against. World Championship mode was here again as your free duel mode, but this time you could select the new turbo duels for this mode so that you could just free duel and turbo duels if you liked. To make this all the better, the dueling interface was actually changed up quite a bit. The game takes full advantage of the DS dual screen function, and the animations are so good for a game of its time. On top of the Wi-Fi battles and trades, ranking and leaderboards were still here, and the game, again, came with 3 exclusive promo cards with Sorcier de Fleur, Necrofleur, and Z1. There were so many little things added and introduced, but I won't go over every single thing outside of the ones worth mentioning above. Seriously, I can't tell you how happy I am to have this game in my hands now, for real. I mean, I'm happy to have been able to get all these games finally, but this one is really special to me. I even got the 3 promo exclusive cards that came with the game at the time because the seller that I bought it from had all of them still kept in great condition. How cool is that? Now, obviously, you can buy these cards for a couple of bucks nowadays because they've been re-released a few times, but having them come from the game just feels different. I'm also very happy because I was able to get nearly all the games complete in box with the original manuals and stuff, which just completes everything for me. For a long time, I wasn't able to get or have any of these games when I was younger because, again, broke high school student, and I didn't get my first Nintendo DS until Christmas of 2008 with the DSi XL, and I couldn't have been happier when I did. Before then, I was borrowing a DS from a friend of mine, and I had a loose copy of Pokemon Diamond, which I could always play if I didn't have the system. But after I got my own system, oh man, it was gaming all day, every day. I remember I would even start saving my lunch money to buy games where I could, and let me tell you, the hunger was worth it every time. Maybe not the best choice at the time, but hey, it was worth it. That's what my younger thought every single day anyways. Now sadly, Over the Nexus would be the final game that we would get in the World Championship line. After this, Konami decided to take a slightly different approach with their Yu-Gi-Oh games, but still kept a lot of things intact with some features and with how the dueling system worked. I have a very special place for this game in my heart. You wouldn't see these games on shelves a lot back when DS games were stocked, but this is one that I would see every now and then, and every time that I did, I would just pick it up off the shelf and just hold it and just look at it, wishing so desperately that I could play it. Even when I didn't have a DS of my own just yet, that coupled with the time period where 5Ds was my thing, man, it hurt to not have it. But now I can finally experience it fully for myself. Even if I did have to do a lot of hunting for it, and even after all these crazy price hikes we've seen in the last few years with old school DS, 3DS, and older console generation games. So that's it. I finally have the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship games that I always wanted when I was younger, and man, I can't tell you just how happy I am. I've been collecting these games alongside some others over the course of the last year, and I feel like I'm at a spot where I'm very comfortable with my collection. Now, we're not done quite yet. I've got a couple more games of the DS that I want to show you guys and have a quick run through before we move on. There's a couple of Yu-Gi-Oh! Side games of the system too. Games that don't tie into the World Championship line of games, but games that are still pretty neat. Let's go ahead and take a real quick look. First, I have Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour, also on the Nintendo DS. This is also another card simulator and was the first of the Yu-Gi-Oh! DS games to take advantage of the dual screen feature because it was the very first Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to be on the DS. There's not a whole lot to it, but I was actually really impressed with this one. It's got some really cool monster animations which really surprised me with how neat they were. Again, it's nothing crazy compared to what we have today, but it's still pretty impressive. I think there's a story mode to it too. I didn't really spend too much time with it, but I have been meaning to jump back into it and give it a little more time. overall, it's a really nice game for what it does. Again, it was the first Yu-Gi-Oh game on the DS to take advantage of the dual screens, and it's kind of what every other game that followed after was built on. This game came after Day of the Duelist on the Game Boy and before the World Championship 2007 game. I was able to grab it for pretty cheap from a secondhand seller for a really nice price. I think it ran me about like 30 AUD, which compared to what you see online is really nice. Next, I have Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Spirit Caller. Released in 2006, this was the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Game to be based off the GX anime to be on the Nintendo DS. With that being the case, the game features only about 13 to 1400 cards. I think it had everything up until Cyber Dark Impact at the time. I think. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. It also features Wi-Fi functionality with online duels and also features its own unique story mode, sort of, based on the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime. You get to create your own character and you pretty much play through the events of the anime, but just in your own shoes. Nothing extra crazy, but I had a nice time going through the story in this game. I think it's because GX is the anime that I'm the most nostalgic for, more than the original Duel Monsters and 5Ds, which is my favorite series of all of them. The whole Duel Spirit thing is also kinda neat too. This game is also fully compatible with the World Championship 2007 and 2008 too, which is awesome. You can import your cards, decks, and customization items from the game into 2007. And of course, you got 3 exclusive promotional cards with the game too, with Brain Crusher, Hunter Owl, and Masked Chopper. When I picked this game up originally, I didn't have the case for it, I just came with the loose cartridge, but I later found an actual proper boxed copy for pretty cheap, so I went ahead and picked that up too, which means I now have a spare copy of GX Spirit Caller. Actually, I've got spares of a couple of these games because I initially got them like just loose, but then I would later find actual cases for them, or I would find actual like boxed copies for them. I got this game online and it came in a small sandwich pack initially full of other DS games that I'm not really interested in. I bought the whole bag collection for like 20 bucks or so, and I literally only got it for this one game. Coming in last now is Yu-Gi-Oh! GX Card Almanac. Now, this game is pretty unique. Unlike nearly all other Yu-Gi-Oh! Games that exist, this one isn't a duel simulator. No, instead, this game is like a database of sorts, and it catalogs all the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that were released up to that point. I believe looking at the timeline, the latest set at the time was Strike of Neos, so it details everything up to that point. It's actually pretty neat, and it includes a life point calculator for when you're dueling so that you don't have to use a calculator or anything. This is before we had stuff like Neuron and all the 40 trillion Yu-Gi-Oh! Life point counter apps that we have access to now, okay? It was a different time. Also, it has a coin and die and also shows you actual combos that people use in the real game. I think it's cool as. Yeah, it may be really outdated, but this must have been such a neat little feature at the time. Now, next to Over the Nexus, this is actually the game I had the second hardest time finding because I could never find any retro stores that had this. Like, ever. I did have to go online to find it, and it took a bit of haggling with the seller, but I was able to get it for an okay price. I got it for about 50 bucks, I think. It wasn't as cheap as most of the other ones, but it was either that or nothing. And looking at how much people are selling this for, now after I bought mine, I am no longer complaining about that price. Probably the least necessary game in the collection, but hey, I was curious and I had to complete the collection. Whoa, and that's it for the DS games. Again, I can't tell you how happy I am to finally own what feels like the missing piece of my childhood. It's amazing owning all these games now and being able to play them at last. I'm genuinely so happy. But wait, the journey doesn't stop there. We may be done with the Nintendo DS, but we got the 3DS as the next era, and with it came a new Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal World Duel Carnival was a game that was released in 2014 and was the first and I believe only game that was based off the Zexal series. Now this game, oh man, this game Firstly, features over 5,500 cards. Everything up to Shadow Specters, which was the main set at the time, and Number Hunters, which was the side set at the time too. It included stuff from so many other sets like Hidden Arsenal and the Duelist packs at the time, and even the structured decks like the Saga of the Blue Eyes, which I remember so well, and the Super Starter V for Victory starter deck. I never owned the structure deck, but I wanted it so bad when I was younger. But that's not even the best part. This game featured more than 50 playable characters from the Zexal anime. Did you hear me? Over 50 playable characters in a Yu-Gi-Oh game. We'd never had anything like this up to this point. Almost everyone that you can think of from Zexal is playable with their own unique decks, which you can change and customize. Even the side characters that got like 0 screen time are in here. Man, what a game. Beyond that, the game is what you expect of a Yu-Gi-Oh game. It's another duel simulator, but this time, the duel system has been changed a bit and the UI has been refined to be much faster and smoother. It does have a story mode too. The game takes place during the events of the World Duel Carnival arc of the anime, and it's handled in a way that every single character has their own unique story that ties into the whole plot, rather than having one big plot. This game is so cool for what it is, honestly. I remember playing it a little when I was younger in high school, but I never played a whole lot of it. The Zexal era is one that I'm so nostalgic for too, because that's when I started trying to get more competitive and I really dove into that side of Yu-Gi-Oh! And started trying my hand at more games at locals and started meeting new people outside school that actually played the game for real for real. I would go to my local card shop almost every day after school and buy a couple of single booster packs with the lunch money that I had saved. And on really special occasions though, I would get myself a structure deck and I was ecstatic every time that I could get one. I think I bought myself about 4 different ones on the shelf at the time. My favorite one was the Cyber Dragon Revolution structure deck. The Zexal era was so good, man. I remember it very well. It's a shame that it's my least favorite anime though. I really don't like the anime all that much. The characters just weren't it for me, except Kite. Kite is super cool. I think I need to just go back and rewatch the whole thing though. I haven't rewatched Zexal since like 2018 anyways, sorry. Anyways, back to the game. It's really cool. I've actually been playing this the most out of all of them, honestly, because it's just so good. You got your 3 promos too, this time with Snowplow Hustle Rustle, Special Schedule, and Night Express Night. All my Earth Machine duelists, rise up. I was able to get this game for pennies. It was like $5 to $7. Because it's a 3DS title, it's more readily available than your DS titles. That's a good thing that I found while looking for my Pokemon games too. I genuinely recommend picking it up if you're a Yu-Gi-Oh fan or a Zexal fan too. Even though it's kinda outdated by today's standards, I still think this one holds up probably the best out of all the other titles that I've looked at so far. Obviously because it's a little bit more modern than those other titles, but hey, you get what I mean. And that's gonna do it for now for my Yu-Gi-Oh! Games retrospective. We've started with the GBA titles and gone over the DS and 3DS line of games. However, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Games would continue on beyond the realm of the Nintendo platforms. Moving away from Nintendo for a little, we have a line of games that I always wanted to play, but never could. Next to Over the Nexus, this set of games has always been out of my reach because, well, I never owned the console that they were available on ever when I was younger. Until now. Tune in with me next time as we go over some of the most anticipated games that I've ever wanted to play with the Yu-Gi-Oh! Tag Force line of games, created primarily for the PSP and PS2 titles. I was gonna try and go over everything in one big video, but given the length of this video already, I will be splitting it into multiple parts. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey as I took a look back on some games that I missed out on my childhood. It feels so cool being able to own these now, and I'm really happy I get to play them now. Actually, as I was making this video, we finally got an official announcement for the next Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, or games from Konami. Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days Collection will be a collection of games featuring a heap of the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Games on the GBA. So what a better time to do my own retrospective on the games that I love. So join me next time for part 2, and until then, I'll see you guys in the duel arena.